Hey, this is Tony Fleecs, the writer and co-creator of Stray Dogs from Image Comics. You're listening to Spoiler Country.
Hello, listeners of Spoiler Country. Today on the show, we have the amazing Mr. Tony Fleecs. How's it going, sir?
It's going good.
I'm a big fan of yours. Your book, Stray Dogs, is one of the few comic books I was able to get my wife to read as well. So she's thank you so much for getting my wife involved into my comic book addiction.
Yeah, very happy to hear that. I hear that a lot, and that's sort of what we're aiming for. We're trying to make a comic for everybody.
So when did you fall in love with comic books for the first time? Do you remember your first comic books?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've always read comic books. My earliest stuff, I remember the Death in the Family trade paperback pretty clearly being like one of the first probably like 10 comics I had, and I treasured that. I thought that was going to be worth a fortune someday. And my sister like bent the cover and I lost my mind. I remember I really started reading like steadily every week from basically then until now, when Jim Lee got his own X-Men, when the Adjectiveless X-Men book started. It wasn't the first issue, it was the third issue. So Chris Claremont's last X-Men issue ever was like my first comic as a collector. And I was just so like amazed by that. And then I found Rob Liefeld's X-Force was going on at the same time, and that like blew my mind. And so I've like, I'm really happy that our book is at Image, because I feel like I've been sort of like an Image comic generation kid. I mean, I say kid looking like a Santa Claus. I'm like 41 years old now, but those are the books that really made me want to come back and read stuff over and over again as a kid.
You know, I think growing up, I read the same comic books. I remember very distinctly not only the death of Robin in the death of the family book. I do have a trade. I think it's like the fifth printing or whatever the hell. I remember printing that. It was like the fifth or sixth printing. And I did remember being in junior high when the X-Men book came out and seeing my friends flip through that book and like peering over the shoulder trying to figure out what it was all about. I'm thinking, shit, I gotta start buying this stuff. And, you know, and then for me, Extreme Studios with Lethal Brigade and Bloodstrike and Youngblood and all that stuff. I used to love those books so much.
Yeah, my friend Chris, for my, God, must have been like 12th or 13th birthday, showed up and gave me like Youngblood Strike File #2.
Ooh.
And like a few other like Image books. And I just remember like Youngblood Strike File #2 is half Rob Liefeld and half Jay Lee, like at the peak of his most masculine horrifyingness, you know?
Yeah.
And that thing, like, it still has my favorite single comic book page ever drawn in it. Like, it's just so crazy.
Yeah.
You know? That like all that stuff I feel like was specifically, I don't think they knew they were doing it, but it was like exactly the right comics for like a pre-adolescent and adolescent teen boys, where it's just all like testosterone and bullets and boobs and
yeah,
you know, like it's not the like if your parents found out you had those comics, they'd be like, this is kind of rough, right? So yeah. I was totally fascinated with them, like totally enthralled with them.
Yeah, I actually on Facebook I have a Extreme Studios 90s Extreme Studios Facebook group that I run. It's not big, but I have, because I love them so much.
Yeah, I'll join that. I'm trying to collect a page from every Extreme Studios artist. Get, like I'll never get a Stephen Platt, you know, probably, because there's not too many of them. But yeah, I've got a bunch of the other ones. I got a Rob Liefeld Youngblood page, and I've got just a sick New Men 2-page spread by Todd Knock. Yeah,
I mean, I one of my favorite series growing up is one of the few comic books I read all the time. Is when they did Extreme Sacrifice, that was a major crossover, and that there was an image where Chapel blows his head off. That image is stuck in my brain forever. It's like one of the most intense moments I've ever seen in a comic. I was like, holy crap!
Well, like, not to change the subject of my book too much, but like the way that I plotted out Stray Dogs, every issue is like a different type of vibe.
Yeah.
And the final issue, the one we're finishing up this weekend actually and sending off to print, is like my Image comic, like my Extreme Studios comic, where it's just like splash pages and 2-page spreads and violent action. It's like, it's obviously like if you put Extreme Sacrifice next to Stray Dogs #5, you wouldn't say like these two things are connected.
Yeah.
But in my mind, that's what I was making. You know, I was making cartoon dogs.
Well, I mean, I really loved what you did with the series Stray Dogs, and I actually read that you attended the Art Institute of Colorado to study computer animation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is the work that you're doing? I know you do a lot of artwork later on with My Little Pony and also Stray Dog, not Stray Dog, sorry, but a lot of the other stuff. Are you doing it on the computer? Is that where? Is it like where's? I'm trying to think of is computer animation something different than the art that you're using?
Yeah, well, I'm not using computer animation at all. Basically, like I went to school to study that, and then decided that I wasn't like I didn't really want to do animation. I wanted to do comics more. So 3D animation is like the modeling, and there's a lot of stuff that transfers. You know, like if you know how to make models, you can make models for like SketchUp and do backgrounds that way. Like there's a lot of stuff that's applicable. But I do a lot of work on computer. Like I'll do my layouts on computer a lot of time. Sometimes I'll do my pages completely on iPad or in Photoshop. But I like to draw by hand a lot too, traditionally. So it's usually a combination of things. And also it depends on like just for the crash commercialism of it. Like if I can sell a page, I'll draw that by hand because it's valuable. And if it's just like, you know, the middle of a Rick and Morty comic that's not like a super explosive page, I can just do that on my iPad and not feel like I'm missing out too much.
Well, your first published work was called In My Lifetime, which was an autobiographical graphic novel. So what was basically the inspiration behind that graphic novel? When did you decide that writing an autobiographical comic book was something that was really important to you? So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was like 2004, 2005. I was participating on like a lot of message boards. Like it was sort of the message board era. And I would be on like artist message boards and comic creator message boards. I was on the Bendis board, and this dude, Shane Glines, who's an animator who worked on like the Batman animated series, had this really vibrant artist message board called, I think it was just called the Shane Glines message board. But I would see people like teaming up and making comics together, and sort of like everybody, it was just a really fertile creative time. Sort of like just before, like while webcomics was happening, but before webcomics was like huge. There was nothing like Webtoon or there was a thing that was before Webtoon that was sort of like the big webcomics explosion before that. But I just saw people making comics, and I was working an art job, but it was just graphic design. It wasn't like super creative. And I was like, well, if I want to make comics, if that's what my goal is, I suppose I should be doing that, because I'm like in my 20s now, and like if Joe Madureira was already drawing comics when he was 16, so I'm already way behind.
Yeah. I remember I actually got the pleasure of talking to Jim Shooter some weeks back, and he's like, I published my first comic book when I was 14. I was like
14 years old. Yeah,
I'm like, I'm 40, I'm 41, not quite published yet. I got some catching up to do.
Orson Welles' Made Citizen came when he was like 26 years old, and you're just like, oh well, fuck it.
I missed that window by a bit.
But yeah, so I started just looking around for like what other people were doing and like what I could do, and maybe find somebody to work with. But none of the people that were sort of like within my reach as far as writers. It's a difficult thing when you draw cartoony like I do, to find somebody that writes the kind of stuff that I would feel was worth my time to spend all this time working on. Yeah. It's like a 1 in a million shot, like, at least for me. I don't think I have super high standards, but I have my own, like I'm trying to make my own thing. And and what I found out was that I could write better stuff for myself than I could find other people to collaborate with. But at the time I didn't feel super confident as like a plotter, but I knew I was a storyteller because I would always tell people stories. And so I was like, well, there's these stories I tell about, like these things that happen to me. And if I've told one of them like 10 times or whatever, I already have all the beats sort of worked out, And so I just decided to do autobiographical. And that was around the time when Jeffrey Brown was sort of popping off, and he was doing autobiographical stuff that was interesting, but he was like way more sensitive than me at the time. And I sort of had, I guess, more like toxic, like confused masculinity. I was like 24 years old or whatever. Yeah. And so I was like, I could do that, like the non-pussy version of this. And then also American Splendor movie came out at the same time. And that was like very romantic in so much as like like here's this person, and he lived in a shitty apartment like I did, and he just was just like, well, my life has value, and I could tell stories about that, and that was really inspirational as well. And I like, if I was cool, I would have already known about American Splendor comics before the movie, but I'm not. I dove into them as soon as I saw that movie and read just like a ton of Harvey Pekar stuff. And similarly, I was like, I could do this, but it would be different because I'm different. So I did that, and I thought I was going to do like, like an ongoing volume of them where it's just like updates on my life. But once I started working as an artist, working in comics, my life got way more boring. Like I had way fewer stories to tell.
The irony of it all, when now that you can better sell your autobiography, there's less to write about.
Yeah, Adrian Tomine did this like little Moleskine autobio thing last year about like just about being a cartoonist, and it was like, oh, that's what you would have done, because it's mostly just about like, well, I'm at a convention. Well, I feel like I'm neglecting my family,
Well, in my lifetime proved extremely successful. It was widely talked about, especially for an indie book. What did that immediate success change about how you approach your trajectory of your career?
I mean, it changed everything. And looking back on it, like if I had that sort of response to a book now, I would be like, this is a failure, I'm doomed. But at the time, coming from nowhere, just to be like, like they would write about me in comic book magazines and stuff, and like creators that I respected like the comic, and they sold it in comic book stores and stuff. So I was just like, oh shit, I'm in comics now. Like I just quit my job and moved away from the Midwest where rent was really cheap, because I was just like, I gotta get to where the magic happens. And I had a friend that was moving to LA for film school, and so I just came with him and sort of dove into just working constantly, like being a full-time freelancer. That's my air conditioner. You want me to turn that off, or is it a problem?
No, it's okay right now. I'm not really hearing it too much.
I'm gonna turn it off.
Okay.
I did one of these last week, and that thing came on, and it sounded like I was inside a refrigerator.
I thought it was actually just a airplane was flying overhead. I was like, you know what? It happens.
That was going to go overhead for another 10 minutes.
So
I moved out to LA with a friend that was moving out here to go to film school, and I just sort of stuck my head down and started trying to get jobs and work on stuff and freelance and do conventions and meet people. And that's sort of how I got started in comics more broadly than just making my own stuff.
Well, fast forwarding quite a bit, you became very well known for doing the My Little Pony series, like Friends Forever and Friendship is Magic, which is published by IDW. So how did you get involved with these series, and what is it about the franchise that keeps you returning back to it?
Well, one of the great things about it is that it's like it has this adult readership that everybody knows about because it's so curious. You're just like, hey, grown-ups read that book? And I love that, but what I also love about it is that I've met a ton of people who say like, oh, this is what we taught our kid to read with. And that's something I didn't think about, because I wasn't necessarily looking to get into doing children's comics when I got into it.
Yeah.
It was just sort of like a job that came along. I had met an editor. I did some samples for Ninja Turtles, and they weren't making My Little Pony comics at the time, but he was like, I like this stuff. And I had done the samples really fast when he asked for them. And so he knew that I was a hustler. And he emailed me back, like he was like, I like this stuff, but it's more cartoony than what we're doing right now, but I'll keep you in mind. And you get emails like that, and you're just like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
But then he did keep me in mind. He emailed me back like a month later or a couple weeks later, and he was like, hey, we're going to do My Little Pony comics, I think. Hasbro wants to see samples of what that would look like. Could you draw like a My Little Pony piece that would be like what the comics would look like? And I had seen like one episode of the show. And so I just Googled it and was like, all right, these are the characters. And I drew this piece, which looking back on it is nothing like what the comics would look like eventually. But I was just like, yeah, this is cool. And I knocked it out real fast and got it back to him. And then I didn't hear anything for a little while. And they announced the team that was doing the comic. And I was like, oh, well, that sucks. I guess I didn't get that job.
Yeah.
But then it turns out what that was the writer. They hired Katie Cook to write the comic, and she was like, oh, I have my friend Andy who I want to draw it. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. So like she came as a package already. But as soon as they started needing like, at first they were just doing a ton of covers. And when they started needing covers for it, they hit me up and were like, "Hey, can you get a cover for this done? And can you get us a cover for this issue done by this day?" And I was just like, "Yeah." The time in between in my lifetime and moving to LA and My Little Pony was about 6 years, and I had like jobs and spurts where like I would get like coloring work or lettering work or do a little bit of a job on this or like some comic book stuff, but nothing super steady, anthologies and stuff. And so, but I had started working at the studio, Garage Art Studios, with my buddy Chris Moreno and Tone Rodriguez. And those guys both just hustled all the time. And I had sort of picked up their hustle. And we had done like these card sets for like Marvel where, you get paid like $5 a card and you got to do like these full color little illustrations. The only way to make it make sense is to do like, like 30 of them a day or something. Because otherwise it's just like, I mean, even at 30, you're making what, like $150? But I just had got like, my hustle was very strong at the time. And so when they said, "Can you get this done by this time?" I was always just like, "Yep." And I would just knock stuff out. And so that sort of made me valuable to them as somebody that could do My Little Pony. And also like I got along with the people at IDW, and so it just worked out really well. And then I would have friends like my friend Jeremy Whitley, who I met through conventions. He did this book called Princeless that I liked a lot. That was a kid's book. And when I met him, he was like, "Oh, you're doing My Little Pony. Like my kid loves that book or loves that cartoon." And I was like, "Oh, well, let me talk to the editors." Like I could sort of, it was a sort of situation where it felt collaborative, where, like we're all making the same major property together. Like I made friends with all the other artists and the writers and stuff. And so it's been like a cool, very personal project to work on for like 8 years now, which is the other thing that's great about it is it's just been so steady, and it won't be forever, but like, I don't know anybody else. All of my friends make comics and work on these things. And I don't know anybody else that's worked on something for 8 solid years,
Yeah. So what do you think has been the key to that franchise's success, My Little Pony?
Well, I mean, it was a big pop, like it came on really strong. It was good. That helps a lot. And it has like a mythology, and like it has like a continuity. I think that helps. And it's one of those weird things that has fans of all ages. There's little kids can get into it, grown-ups are into it. And so I think it just sort of, I feel like they could have kept making the show forever and it would have kept being popular forever. And that's sort of what they did with the comics. They're just like, well, we can just keep rolling with this, sort of like they did with G.I. Joe or Transformers. Like there's another Hasbro thing that just sort of seems like you could go on forever with it. I know that like the changes are coming up because they're relaunching the show with a new like a new redesign and new stories and stuff. So it'll be different, but I feel like it's a story that people want to keep up with. And
yeah, I mean, IDW doing some crazy stuff. Like I remember, I think they're actually making a second series of My Little Pony, a crossover with Transformers.
I'm working on that right now.
Yeah, I mean that's such a I never thought of that as an idea, but it was apparently extremely successful because they're making a second one right now.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things. That like the first cover for issue 1 of the first series, I had drawn back in 2015, I think, because we've just been working on it for years. Not like it took years to make, but the way Hasbro works, like you have certain people that are in charge of like approving things or like saying what projects we should be working on. And at one point, somebody was like, "We should do My Little Pony Transformers," and everybody was on board with it. And they commissioned a bunch of artwork. And then jobs switched around. Like people, I don't know if people got fired or moved on or just moved to different departments at Hasbro. And when the new people came into My Little Pony, they were just like, "Oh, we don't care about that. Like we don't mix boy toys and girl toys." And so the project just sort of died. Like it was about to happen and then it died. And then every time I would see Hasbro people or IDW people at a convention or whatever, I would say like, "Yo, when are we going to do My Little Pony Transformers?" Because it's so cool. Like just the visual of these cute little ponies and these gigantic robots was so appealing to me. Like I see the vision, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I know it's just like a intercompany crossover from a major corporation. So it's not like a vision that like a big artistic vision that I'm having, but I could just see that it was cool, you know? And so I just would hector them and hassle them about it. And eventually, finally, they emailed me and they're like, "Hey, we're going to do it. We need a cover ASAP." And I was like, "Well, I did a cover in 2015." They're like, "Okay, good. Let's go."
And I mean, now that you're once again a very successful writer with Stray Dogs, are you considering doing art and doing some writing duties on My Little Pony?
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. So the second My Little Pony Transformers, the first one I did all the very first part and the very last part, just the artwork. So it's like the wraparound, you know, like the setup and the conclusion of the crossover. This one, because I'm working on Stray Dogs so much while they're doing My Little Pony Transformers, I could only sort of do one story. But my editor was a fan of Stray Dogs now. She didn't know I could write before. And so when she said, "Do you want to do some of this My Little Pony Transformers?" I was like, "Yeah, but only if I could write it." And so she was like, "Yeah, of course." So I wrote and drew, and I'm coloring. Like it's sort of all the parts of it besides the letters are me, and that's fun because I feel like I sort of get to have the complete, you know, like I love, and it's cool to be able to sort of like from soup to nuts put something together for this book. So it's like a Soundwave versus like these young ponies, the young six, who are like the new generation of students in My Little Pony.
Yeah.
And Vinyl Scratch and Octavia, who are like this DJ pony and her girlfriend who plays a cello.
That sounds very cool. I mean, yeah, Soundwave is one of my favorite Transformers. I mean, going back to watching a kid as an 80s, Soundwave is probably my top 5.
Oh, for sure. He's in my top 1, I think. Like he's got tapes, he's got a cool voice, you know, like I thought his powers were cool. And I think I know so much more about ponies than Transformers at this point that when I wrote it, I was just sort of like, I think Soundwave does this. And they would shoot back little notes here and there. But I think when it comes out, people are going to be just like, Soundwave can't do that. So we'll see how it goes.
You know, in a world where My Little Ponies are fighting Transformers, I think Soundwave can do whatever the hell he wants, to be honest with you. I mean, how does it feel to also be working with the Transformers? Was that something you were a big fan as a kid, and this is something that you're gonna do more of?
Yeah, I was a fan. I don't think I would do it's not like I'm gonna shoot to make more Transformers comics. Like if they do a My Little Pony Transformers 3, I probably would do something with it, but they're so much harder to draw than the ponies that I'm just like, this is a lot. It's fun to do every once in a while. But I see like my friend Livio works on Transformers all the time. And I'm just like, how, why, you know, like it seems like a nightmare. Even, you know, like drawing just regular superhero comics or comics with people is like, oh, I mean, these are people, but the Transformers are like you know, like their forcep has 4 sides, you know, their fingers all have 4 sides, you know, it's 6 sides. It's a lot of planes to draw, but I have sort of this simpler, cartoonier style, so I sort of have fun drawing a Transformer that fits into a world with My Little Pony, and I think that's what everybody on the book sort of is good at doing. There's this dude Jack Lawrence that's drawing the main story on the sequel, and he's fucking great at it. And I didn't realize it because he had worked on the first series too, but he did this book at Image years ago called Lions and Tigers and Bears, and it was not really an inspiration to Stray Dogs, but when I was thinking of doing Stray Dogs as a comic, I was like, I would want it to be animated looking like Lions and Tigers and Bears was. And then I like forgot the name of the guy that drew it. And then when I saw this guy kicking ass on My Little Pony Transformers, I looked him up and was like, oh, it's that guy.
So now that with Stray Dogs, so where did the inspiration for doing it originally come from?
Well, like for doing it specifically, for like the inspiration to make create our own stuff came from, I'd been working on My Little Pony for so long. And like the first goal there's sort of like stages in your career as you start working in comics. First is like break in, make a comic, get paid to make comics. Like that's first step. And then second is like get hired, make your living making comics. And then that's where I had been for years, you know, like I was making my living making comics, doing conventions, like just doing the freelancer hustle where you make a living. But I sort of had forgot that the main thing that I wanted to do was to tell my own stories, and I wasn't really building up any sort of library or equity making these licensed books because I don't own any part of that, And so I worked in a studio with some friends, and they were doing creator-owned stuff, and I was just like, I forgot I was supposed to be doing this. And so I started just like, I had a list of stuff that I wanted to make, and I just started focusing on it more, and then sort of opening myself up to the idea of having ideas, where you're just like, I'm going to make stuff, so let me think about what I would make. And I did this book, Time Shopper, which has been sort of delayed, but we're going to kickstart next month. That was like the first one where it was a short thing, and I was like, this is manageable. I did it with a friend, my friend Christian Misi, and it was just like, this is something where I can sort of get my head around it. And while I was working on that, I had the idea for Stray Dogs, which was I was watching the show Bates Motel, which is about a young Norman Bates. And I got up to leave the room, and when I left the room, Norman Bates was just there by himself. And when I came back, he had a puppy with him. And my friends in the studio, I was like, did he kill somebody and take their puppy? And they were like, no, that he just found this puppy. And I was like, oh, it would be cool if he would have killed somebody and took their puppy. I just immediately, all these ideas started flooding into my head about a killer that stole people's dogs after he killed them, and like the stories that could come out of that. And I sort of tumbled it around in my head for a while because I knew that it was something, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I would sort of take myself down the path of like, all right, so what if it's from the victim's perspective? Or what if it's from the cop's perspective? Or what if it's like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, where it's from the murderer, like Maniac, where it's from the murderer's perspective? And then pretty quickly, though, just because I had been like a big animation kid and like into cartoons as a kid, sort of obsessed with like Disney and Don Bluth and stuff, I was like, well, I don't think we've ever seen it told from the perspective of the dogs, like we haven't seen this story, but we especially haven't seen it told from a dog's perspective. Like even Old Yeller is not told from Old Yeller's perspective. And not that Old Yeller was kidnapped and by somebody that murdered.
That's a different story.
But so once I got the idea of telling it from the dog's perspective, I started seeing like the character archetypes and big beats in the story that would happen. And it's sort of like, it wasn't immediate, but like parts of it really started to fill in. And working on the 5th issue right now, like I said earlier, we're putting it all to bed this weekend. It's all due at Image on Monday. And there's stuff that we're finishing up right now that I thought of like on that first day, where it's just like, oh, this big thing happens. And then, like this will happen. So that'll kick this off. And it feels pretty great to just sort of have gotten to this point where all this, the inspiration that I had on that day, we're finally, years later, finally getting it all out there.
So can you give our listeners the pitch for Stray Dogs?
Yeah, 40 minutes in, for sure. So Stray Dogs is a comic about, and this is a little spoily, there's a serial killer who takes his victims' dogs as trophies. And we tell the story from the perspective of the latest dog that he's taken. And dogs have bad short-term memory. So after a while, after this guy kidnaps them, they just think that they're his dogs. And so this new dog shows up at the house with 10 other dogs in it. And they're all just sort of living there peacefully. And it's great because they're well taken care of. And this guy really cares for his dogs. And she doesn't quite remember what happened, but eventually she figures out and tells them, hey, your master came into my house and he killed my lady and he brought me here. And all the other dogs are shocked and they don't know if they should believe her or not. They don't believe her. And it's a story about her having to like get these other dogs on her side and figure out what they could even do because they're dogs, they don't have fingers. They can't open doors. They can't really do anything. So it's a horror story, but it looks like a 1990s animated sort of like Don Bluth or Disney movie.
I think what you do so well with this series is that you found a way to give the dogs really full personalities, but still make it fully conceivable that they're real dogs. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and that's a hard thing to balance because one, you have to give them personalities, they have dialogue, they have to be able to solve a mystery, but they still have to feel like their dogs. They're not like a Disney movie where like Robin Hood, where the dogs are like Robin Hood, and they're all with people and they're all acting like humans.
Yeah.
So how did you go about creating that balancing act between the real making them dogs, but you got to tell a narrative?
A lot of that is Trish, the artist Trish Forstner, is so good at personality and so good at dogs that just like a lot of the believability of it comes just from her doing the work. So I got a real assist on that just from her being great at what she does. But then a lot of it too is just sort of like thinking about it while I'm writing it and sort of like setting up the parameters of how these dogs are dogs, like in some cases their personalities come from like an archetype. Like the main dog Rusty is just sort of like your cool alpha hero dog, like in the early stages before we'd even designed him, we would just describe him as like, this is the Billy Joel dog, like this is the one that Billy Joel played in the Disney movie. And then like the Roxanne, the Malamutes, like sort of a nurturing motherly dog, mother hen type dog. And then the main dog Sophie is sort of like your final girl, but she's also like, she starts out very afraid. And so like most of hers is just almost like she's in PTSD, or she's a survivor of trauma. And then the other dogs is like, sometimes their stories would come from like, well, what kind of owner did they have? Or like, this dog is super wacky. Where did he come from? Is his breed just sort of wacky? And so like, it's a combination of things. There's 11 dogs in the story, which is a handful to keep track of if you want to give every one of them like a moment or like a full personality. But luckily, like I said, Trish is so good that she gives them personality even in scenes where they're not like the focus or not doing, they're not the main dog in the scene. She just manages to fill every panel with these dogs, and each one of them sort of has a vibe. She's really great at it. And
the series kind of feels sort of like, what if Disney made a horror movie, like, with its cartoons?
Yeah.
Talking about ideas of balance, because as well as balancing the dogs, keeping them a narrative and making them real dogs, you also have to balance, it feels like, making it in the horror elements, but also keeping the kind of the cartoon elements of the dogs and making it without going too far to the extreme on either one end, it seems like.
Yeah.
Once again, how did you focus and do that?
Well, that's really important to me. But just because like I'm a big fan of horror and horror movies, but the kind that I like there's all kinds of horror movies, and there's horror movies that are almost like different genres. There's like horror romance and there's horror comedies. And I like some horror comedies and I hate some horror comedies. And hate is a strong word. But the thing with those is the balance, where you have to decide if you're going to be a horror thing or a comedy thing, because you can't be both. And in this case, I knew we had to decide if we're going to be an animated thing or a horror thing, because we can't, you don't want to be a bad middle ground of either of them. You want to be the best version of one of them. And it can still be an animated horror thing, but it just had, like you said, it's a balance. And so the thing of it is the characters are always the characters, but the stuff that's happening to them, that's what's driving it. Because they're all passive characters, like I said, they don't have hands, they can't do much, they're just stuck in this situation. So that's such a overpowering, like, psychological nightmare that even if they're cute dogs and even if they do funny things in the middle of it, you still have this, like this dread. And also because you don't want anything to happen to these dogs, you have this pure dread that you're just like, I hope they're going to be okay. So that's sort of what the balance was for me, was like nothing goofy or silly happens, but they can be goofy and silly because they're dogs.
Yeah. And another, and I really like a theme that I feel like is running through the comic book. There seems to be, because the dogs mentioned multiple times, the idea that their master is good, and the idea is that the master is good to them, the master is therefore good because it's good. He's good to them. I kind of felt like the theme in it was kind of like the concept that how people present themselves differently in different situations, and you can't really ever know anyone. Was that kind of one of the themes you were going with, or am I over reading too much into that? It's a concept.
No, I think you're reading into it, which is cool. It's definitely about how people Now, yeah, you don't know what somebody's like at home. I like one of the main things that I believe is the like whenever you interact with somebody, a stranger or like somebody that you don't know everything in their life, like you don't know everything in their life. You don't know what their deal is. And this is sort of like the horrifying extrapolation of that. Like you don't know what this guy's deal is. He might have a farmhouse full of dogs that he stole from people he killed, And the dogs, you think it's like that old thing where like people talk about Hitler was a dog lover, and so it's like his dog didn't know what a monster he was. He was just like, oh, this guy gives me treats. What a neat mustache. And so I think about that, and then also like the broader version of it is, like us as people, like when people say like my city's the best or my country's the best or whatever, you're just like, well, that's not from like knowing everything or, like that's not taking everything into account. And I feel like in this story, the dogs are sort of like a version of that, where they're just like, this guy's great. We love him, but they don't know everything.
And I think it was just a genius thing to think about, the idea, once again, the fact that those dogs really just judge the individual based on what he does for them, as if that is the entire makeup of an individual is what they do for you. It's such an interesting, I really thought that was a very clever thing to put into the story.
Well, I mean, that's the whole story, basically. It's the idea that the dogs only know what they know. And so like, that's sort of like our gateway into the story is just that like, it's a mystery because like any person who's like took a look at this house and watched it for 2 days would be like, oh, this is a serial killer. But because these dogs don't have any concept of that or don't know, anything outside of what they know, it's just like, we're waiting for them to catch up. It's like Columbo, right? Like we know who the killer is and we're waiting for them to solve it.
And I mean, there's so many fascinating aspects, as you mentioned, like the memory. And I think what you did was really smart. In the opening first issue, the first couple of pages at the vet's office, you seem to have laid the groundwork for what the rules are for these dogs. They always love their master, and the idea they're really bad memories.
Yeah.
So then the bad memories, bad with memories, not bad memories. Bad with memories, well, I guess maybe both are technically true, depending on the dog and the scene, is a major plot point of this story. Is that they don't remember who their masters necessarily are. They don't necessarily remember day to day where they came from. So once again, working with that as the idea of with the having bad memories, how did you work with that? Because I mean, obviously that leaves other issues where it's obviously some rules. How much can they remember? What can trigger a memory? Things of that nature. How did you plan out the rules of, I guess, how their memories work?
Well, I didn't have like a hard and fast, like a countdown clock for when they would forget things because I didn't feel like it was as like by the numbers as that, but I definitely kept a thread. Like when I outlined the whole thing, I would just pop a little note every once in a while that said like, forget here. And it would be random, but it would just be a reminder that like a dog should forget something here because we want to always be thinking about how they could at any point forget everything. And I don't know if this is a spoiler. But early on in the outlining of the thing, no, I guess this is, we still got 2 more issues. I don't want to talk about what does or doesn't happen.
Okay, fair enough. Another decision that I'm curious why you made it. The humans are pretty much never fully seen. What led to that narrative decision? It kind of reminded me a little bit of, ever watched the cartoon The Muppet Babies where you only ever see the legs?
Yeah, I worked on Muppet Babies last year.
Oh, wow, okay.
On the new one. Yeah, it came from that. It came from Tom and Jerry. It's like Peanuts. It's like a classic cartoon trope. But also in the case of a mystery, like it's even better because you can't see who the killer is or who the victims are. It sort of was like a real easy choice. When I knew I was going to focus on the animals, I knew that we weren't going to be showing the people's faces because you want to keep it in the POV of the animals all the time.
And I think the fact that you keep the dog, once again, feeling realistic, as someone who's a dog owner themselves, dogs are extremely forgiving animals. They're I guess what people would say about a dog is that they basically are just like pure love. You know what I'm saying? Even if you yell at them, you say bad dog, whatever. A couple minutes later, they love you again. You're the greatest master in the world. Now you're dealing with someone who actually is a killer. And I found it kind of fascinating because the dogs have to then deal with the idea of the forgiving nature of a dog, and the reality is they killed a master that they probably don't even remember anymore.
Yeah.
So once again, it seems that it creates a whole nother layer of concern for what these dogs can do. So how important is that into the future storyline?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Yeah, I guess I don't want to talk too much about it, but that's what it's about. It's about these dogs coming to terms with, is this what this person is, remembering what this is, and then do we still love this guy anyway? He does feed us, like this is great here. So yeah.
Do the dogs feel bad because it was their owner that was killed, or do they have an understanding of that killing in general is a bad thing, a sinful thing in their minds?
I mean, you got to read to find out, but yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm picking for information. Once again, so what can our readers look forward to in future issues? It's a 5-issue series, is that correct?
Yeah, it's 5 issues, and then there's a little bit more. We're doing a free comic book day issue, which reprints issue 1 and has a brand new prologue that's about the first dog that ever came to the master's house. And then later on in the year, early next year, we're going to do either 1 issue or 2 issues that are called Stray Dogs Dog Days, and it'll sort of be like anthology style. We're sort of focus on each of the dogs from the story and sort of tell a little bit more about them and sort of like build a little bit more mystery and just sort of get because we have such a large cast and it's only 5 issues, we didn't get to really go deep on every single dog. And so this is sort of an opportunity to give a little more shine to all the characters, because what we had hoped was that people would be like, oh, we want more of these dogs, but we didn't want to we didn't want it to get bloated or do too much of the book, because it is intense. And I think you're asking a lot for readers to just be like, come back when we terrorize them again next week. I think 5 issues is sort of a pretty manageable size for something like this, where it's from 2 creators that you don't know unless you read My Little Pony, and it's just a strange concept, but it seems pretty mainstream once you read it, but to pitch it, you're just it's dogs and it's a horror story. I don't know what this means.
But I was gonna say, you must recognize that the book is performing way better, I imagine, than expectations were for the book. I mean, the first issue sold out. As someone who tried to find a first printing on eBay for my wife, because apparently my wife won't read a comic book from issue number 2. She has to buy the first issue, and I personally don't buy second printings. I want the first one. I went on eBay for it, and my God, they're expensive now. I did buy a second printing, so I could read the first one as well. But I mean, it's the series is killing it. I mean, they're selling out. They're popular. Second printings are selling out well above cover as well.
Yeah. No, we never expected this. I mean, the In My Lifetime, the first book we talked about, that sold 750 copies when it came out. And I thought that was a huge success, we got a second printing on that, at a different publisher. So I was just I've made it. But yeah, this sells exponentially more than that. And we didn't know, like I said, it's a strange concept, and it's from creators that you don't necessarily know. But the thing we knew about it was that we were going to make the best version of this thing, that, nobody else is going to make a better comic about this than us, And so we knew that we were going to bring this weird concept, we were going to do the best version of it. And so we were confident about that, which is not my normal setting. I'm not I'm not a naturally confident person, but I just knew from making this book and sort of being hyper critical and hyper aware of my own stuff that this is good. I'm not worried about that part of it. I'm worried about people finding it. And so it's been very heartening and encouraging that people did find it, and also, the money is good too. That's nice as well. But yeah, we didn't expect it at all.
I mean, obviously with success, I know you're saying you're doing some other books that are connected to it. Is there that feeling that you want to now make the sequels? Because let's face it, when something is this successful, sequels are almost guaranteed in demand by an audience, by often the publisher. Is that something that's already being considered? I mean,
people talk about it. We've talked about it. But I feel there's a certain dignity is not the word, but there's a certain prestige to just being one good fucking story, just you can just hand somebody this and go that's it, it's all right there. And I I feel like that is, even thinking about the money possibilities of doing another one and making this money again, like I feel like it's more valuable to have one great one. And also, like, when you read the 5th issue, you'll be like, oh, that's the story, like there's not a 7-part 2, there is a Silence of the Lambs part 2, but I don't need it, like we would be fine if there was just Silence of the Lambs. And so I feel like we're just going to do this one, and that might be a mistake, but I feel like it's just like it's a classy and an impactful thing to just have one, boom, here it is. There's only one volume of We Three,
Yeah. I mean, I imagine there's, for something this successful, it feels like it's destined for multimedia exposure. Do you think is that something that's been discussed?
Yeah, we sold it to Paramount Animation.
Oh, shit.
Before the book even came out. So that's something that's in the works. We've only optioned it. They haven't gone into production, so it's not for sure that it's going to be a thing, but yeah, it's definitely a thing that's being discussed.
That is absolutely awesome. I didn't expect that as an answer. Very cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hopefully, like, they want to make it the first like animated horror movie, and I'm all on board for that. That sounds, that's something that I could take to a high school reunion.
That definitely does. So what do you got? So what do you got coming up?
So right when Stray Dogs ends, issue 5 comes out in June, and right after that, we're launching a Kickstarter for this book that I mentioned called Time Shopper, which is a European format graphic novella hardcover that is completely different from Stray Dogs. It's a time travel comedy about a guy that gets a job traveling in time, and he's supposed to fix all of history's greatest disasters. Like, he's supposed to warn the Titanic about the iceberg and warn JFK and kill baby Hitler. But they send him back in time, and when he gets back in time, he gets so distracted by how cheap everything used to be that he just goes shopping instead. And so it's basically like wish fulfillment for myself. I always think, like, boy, if I could just go back and get, Hulk 181 or Action Comics #1, like that stuff you always say. And so it's a comic that's about that. And I wrote it, and my buddy Christian Nisi drew it. And the rest of the team is the team from Stray Dogs. So the colors are by Brad Simpson, who does Stray Dogs, and the layouts are by Tone Rodriguez, who laid out Stray Dogs. And so that's a completely different, way off brand follow-up that we're going to be kickstarting right after the last Stray Dogs comes out.
Well, I wish you tons of success. When you're ready to promote the next project in your Kickstarter, please come back on the show. I'd love to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a great pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, it was nice talking to you too.
Spaghetti! And we're back.
That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out Spoilerverse.com, because at Spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora, amazing directors and artists of all walks of life, and editors and writers, and oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at Spoilerverse.com, and I highly implore you to go there and check it out.
Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Bridges and Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
we put out
Point Radio.
episodes all the time. Go check all of them out, and check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you, every day on Spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. You want to help support the site? You can do it 2 ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry, or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/Discord, you can join our public Discord server and come chat with us all day long.
I couldn't say it better myself, dude.
There you go.
You just mouthed out a ton of information at once, and really, I hope you guys enjoy what you're hearing, because we're working our butts off to bring it to you.
We are.
I guess there's only one left thing. Yeah, I'm going to go with it. There's only one left thing left to do.
What's that?
In an oceans of podcasts,
We are Cthulhu.
as Cthulhu compels you to
Spaghetti! open the mind,
and read more.
Spaghetti.